Great. Hi, everyone. This is Max. I'm here with the European Time Zone Meetup group, and we are going to collaboratively close read two poems today. The first is Subliminal by Lauren Niedecker, which also happens to be one of the current essay assignments in ModPo. I'm going to go ahead and read the poem, and then we'll open up the discussion and see what happens. This is Subliminal by Lauren Niedecker. Sleep's dream, the nerve flash in the blood, the sense of what's seen. I took cold on my nerves, my mother tall, tormented, dark infested. Oof. I think I have to do that again.
Yes.
Subliminal by Lauren Niedecker. Sleep's dream, the nerve flash in the blood, the sense of what's seen. I took cold on my nerves, my mother tall, tormented, dark infested. This may very well be the most difficult poem we've ever tackled as a group. I don't even really know where to begin or what to make of it. So let's open the floor. Any first impressions, any thoughts, anything anybody wants to try to tackle here? Anybody have any idea on how to start with this one?
Your first reading was actually the best. The ending comes abruptly. Well, surprisingly.
So the first reading with the more abrupt ending. Yeah, I mean, because I caught myself by surprise the first time through by forgetting that it ended on dark infested. And so I was preparing, I had a full breath and was ready to keep reading, but of course it just stops there.
Yeah.
Does anybody know how Lauren Nedecker's relationship with her mother was?
Ooh, that's a good question. You know, at one point I think I did know, but now I don't recall.
Where's Vijaya? She should be looking it up.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's the Vijaya would have that at hand.
Yeah, maybe you don't need to read it. This is the essence of it all, of her relationship with her mother.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, good point, Kurt. Yeah, we don't need to go for biographical information. We have all the information in the poem. That's very new critical, very Mod-Povian. Totally. Yeah, this is the relationship. What more could we possibly need to know about this relationship?
No. That's an intentional fallacy. Who says is Lauren Niedecker? Who says that the speaker is Lauren Niedecker?
Yes, and right. This is also right.
Good point.
Also very new critical. So now we've gotten both sides of the interpretive controversy here. It's either all about Lauren Niedecker or it has nothing to do with her, right? And we need to sort of thread the needle for ourselves.
It strikes me that it's a poem of two halves. The first half is the first two stanzas. The first four lines are about a sort of a sleep, a dream sense, sort of being physically present, and then it switches to this mother figure who's
No, and both of them nerve is important. Nerve flash, and then I to call on my nerves. Time nerve is important. And it's strange because the studies that often dreams are narratives, that our brain puts things together in a narrative way. And this is a very strange, because what other kind of dream would be daydream, sleep dream?
Did you call it a coffin dream?
It could be a coffin. Yeah.
Is that what did you call it? That's what I thought you said.
A daydream, but a coffin dream is perfect because we're having Halloween.
Indeed. Yeah. Seasonal.
A daydream. A sleep dream.
back to Niedecker's mother. Nieder was off to college and she had to go back to take care of her mother. Her mother lost her hearing, I believe, and so and they were poor. They were all poor. So she had to give a lot up for her to take care of her mother.
If it's anything, this morning in my meditation, I heard a voice say, "We can't all be David Bowie, or can we?" And I realized ground control to Major Tom. I mean, this is that's all I hear with my mother was tall, tormented, dark, infested. And that's my 2 cents for this. I'm getting ready for the eclipse. So. Oh wow.
Yeah,
I've had an experience in the last couple during the pandemic. I developed diabetes, and I had so I'd never had the experience in my body of a nerve flash in the blood. And it was, I mean, my experience that I relate to this poem is that at night, my feet felt like electricity was going through my body in a kind of in a lightning, violent way. Like I could literally feel the nerve go if this is my foot and like come out, so much so that I thought, like, is my toe or foot burned? It was very strange. Just by the way, I don't have that anymore because my blood sugar is under control. Through diet, so it's possible. But so the nerve flash in the blood, and some of this I was reading as some neuropathy, and in my case, diabetes is also inherited, a hereditary disease. But not to be over determined about it being that. It's just I had never had a physical experience of a nerve flash before, and I do. And of course, blood is you know, obviously there's many meanings to blood. Sins of the parents and heredity and
that's
words and
that's the nerve. That's a brilliant reading of blood, Rebecca. Yeah, the nerve flash in the blood, almost as though Lauren Niedecker is sort of like you know, jolting awake here from this dream with this kind of tingling, some sort of something neurological, something taking place with the nerves, a pain or not necessarily a pain, and is then here in the second half of the poem, we were talking about how there feels to be 2 sections, is then reminded also in this sort of dream state, right, in a way of her mother's nerve condition, or the way that her mother spoke of her own nerves, right, taking hold on the nerves. And then it's in the blood, the nerve flash is passed through. That's really cool. Yeah, I think it's a good way to start making sense of why, or of how these 2 you know, halves are fitting together with this sort of through line of the nerve.
I mean, just on disease, cold on my nerves reminded me of neuropathy, which of course is like a numb feet, and you can't feel where you're standing. You can't get ground, you know, you're not grounded. Something is underfoot, but you can't feel it.
I'm curious about what we make of this middle couplet, the sense of what's seen, which is ostensibly what's linking, you know, the first reference of nerves to the second reference of nerves. The sense of what's seen. I mean, you know, there's obviously the optic nerve and sensing in general. That's you know, if we want to get really like neurological with it, but I don't know, maybe there's some other way to understand this rather quickly.
Yeah, if you think if you think of sleep as processing what has come before, then sleep's dream is about something that is seen before.
Right. That you have this sort of input, and the dream is kind of, you know, going back through it or something. Kurt, did you have something you wanted to?
Well, just two things. You said that the sense of what's seen. I thought it might be, you said as a bridge. Maybe it's to sense of self versus empathy with someone else. The sense of what's seen, when you see someone, then you know that someone else is there.
Hmm.
And the other thing is, oh God, I forgot what I was going to say. I forgot. I'll get back to you later if I remember.
Yeah.
The mother. That's off when you talk about psychoanalysis. Your parents are always in your dreams.
Yeah, they very frequently are. I mean, maybe that's not true for everybody, but it is. I think that's something absolutely that was remarked in early psychoanalysis, right?
I related seeing more to the dream, the dream as something visual. We dream in picture.
I took the sense. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I thought someone froze maybe, and I was talking over them. I'm sorry.
No, go for it.
I took the sense of what's seen, maybe of something like the things I've seen, the things I've experienced. Like when you wake up and you're like, oh, you're kind of reminded because of the dream things you have seen. And then I thought the second part about the mother. At first I thought it was like a relationship, but after what Barbara said, I'm like, maybe it's like a representation of things she had to give up while taking care of the mother. It's not about the mother at all, but more about the situation. Maybe it was a very nice mother, you know, caring mother, but like she had to give everything up, and she had to see the disease and seeing someone you love going through like a disease.
I wonder if there's a sense in which because subliminal is stuff you can't see. So when I first read the poem, the second stanza, the sense of what's seen kind of stood out to me as almost undercutting the title. Except it relates to the first stanza and being jolted awake, and then you can still see what was in your dream. You know, when you sort of come abruptly awake, the dream is still there and it's very present.
That's interesting. It's making me think a little bit of how like what is subliminal, like a subliminal message in a sort of, you know, classic definition is not necessarily what's not seen, but it's what you see without realizing you've seen it, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're watching, you know, there was always these sorts of urban myths about how like you would go to the movie theater and there would be subliminal messages for like Pepsi or something showing throughout, so then you'd have to go up and go get a Pepsi from the concession stand. Like it's you know, the idea that something can flash before your eyes and like work on your brain, work on your nerves potentially, without you having without you becoming aware that you've actually seen it, which I think actually really goes a long way into sort of unpacking this up with the sense of what's seen, right? Because there's what's seen and there's the sense of what's seen, right? There's the, you know, there's various levels. There's the liminal, the subliminal, and in one Simpsons episode they even make a joke about the superliminal, but that's completely different. That's not an actual thing. But you know, there's what you see and what there's what enters your consciousness, your perception, and there's what you realize enters your consciousness and perception, right? There's these various levels at work.
It's also true when you first wake up from for me, I've had this experience where you first wake up from a dream and it's vivid and you have a lot of feeling about it, and then it's gone, and later in the day you remember that you had a powerful dream,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
you can't really remember the story of it, just the
Totally.
sense of it. And the beginning is certainly about sensations. This it is Halloween-like, sort of this frightening, chilling sensation, these few words, and then maybe gone, just fleeting.
Yeah, so that also ties it right back to the dream very well. Yeah, this sort of the way that dreams, they sort of linger with you, like in you in an uncanny way. Like I always remember all of my dreams upon waking up and then somehow proceed to forget them like 10 minutes later. It's always a very, very bizarre feeling, but we all get so used to it, right? Like it's just what dreams are, it's just what sleep is. And then yeah, it's true. You can kind of get these flashes once in a while of but
This may be
subliminal.
banal, but I tend to be a punster, and I see dark infested. I like the fact that it's one word, and I know you do too, Max, because you live in Germany.
Yeah, it's a very German style compound. Yeah, go on.
But also you hear in the background shark infested, and talk about subliminal.
Mhm.
I mean, and when a poem I don't know.
That shark infested is great. That's absolutely, yeah. There's absolutely it's that word dark infested is totally chiming with shark infested. That's cool. There's an extra. It really steps up the sense of danger or menace here at the end, which is kind of in the poem the whole time, right? Like I think this sleep's dream, the nerve flash in the blood, right? Like the blood in the water, right? That's also sort of sharkian theme. But it's this whole poem is kind of is menaced the whole time, right? Like you're dreaming and then you have this nerve flash. And then you end with this sort of dark infested, shark infested, this swarming.
Fins up.
Fins
up.
Yeah, right.
Well, circling back up again to the sense of what's seen, I'm thinking about sense as gut sense, as intuition. And when like the phrase, like, I know what I know, I see what I see. And then the tension, if someone tells you, you didn't see that, you don't know that, the sense of what's seen, to me, it's like, I trust my intuition about what I know, and I will not be told I didn't see what I saw.
Wow.
I could say a little bit something to that. There's sort of a philosophical definition of subliminal, which you might call pre-verbal thought. And I like that definition a lot, because I like to think about when I'm trying to find the words, and somehow there's a thought that has its integrity, but you don't have the words yet. And here you are saying what you just said, Rebecca. It sounds a little bit like that, because you see something, but maybe you don't have the words to describe it. But you know that's there, and your knowledge is somehow stronger than maybe your ability to articulate what you saw.
Or I was thinking, it may be unsafe to articulate it. Like if you're a child and you have a dark infested mother.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah.
And then tall means she's much bigger. She's over, tall is somebody who's over somebody else, taller than somebody else. She remembers tall.
Yeah, tall.
Menacing. It fits in with Kurt's idea, menacing.
Tall, tormented, dark, infested. Yeah, and the tall. Yeah, this also goes, I think, to Rebecca's point a little bit too as well. Like there seems to be, if tall is something that stands out, then perhaps we have this sort of child's point of view perspective, right? Because like, I mean, unless her mother was truly exceptionally tall, I don't really know what that has to do with, you know, why this tall, tormented, dark, infested, you know, why those three descriptors, other than to sort of situate us in a kind of child's POV, right? Like when you're little and all adults seem to be giants.
And it's not a very friendly description of the mother, is it? This is not a mother you would want to have at all.
No.
Tall, tormented, dark, infested. And it kind of puts me in mind almost of a fairy tale, and she's like this wicked witch in the wood kind of figure. I can just see, you know, maybe it's because we're near Halloween, I can just see this dark figure looming up at the end of the poem.
I read the poem quite differently. To
Okay.
me, the third stanza was some kind of interjection. I took hold on my nerve, my mother, and then go back to the sense of what's seen, told, or tormented, dark, infested. So when you read it, Max, and you clearly thought told, tormented, and dark, infested was about the mother, it was quite the shock to me.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I had both ideas, but actually, when I started reading that, well, maybe I'm more of a literature man, because when I read Sleep's Dream, what came to my mind was the dream allegory, and I was expecting, oh, here comes a dream allegory, and then in the end, it wasn't. And also the title, the first idea that I had was this romantic concept of the sublime, and it's also included in words somehow. And then you get down that the first section of that poem, tall, tormented, and that is the sublime.
Yeah, the connection back to the sublime is an interesting one for sure. I hadn't thought of it. The sublime, of course, being this, you know, romantic, poetic aspiration, right? And you have this sort of distortion of it here with the subliminal.
At first, I thought it was far-fetched, but when I reread the poem, it's in there.
On wordplay of subliminal, for some reason I kept reading it as sublingual, which is like to put a pill under your tongue and I guess, you know, hold it there, wait for it to dissolve. So it was like this thing under your tongue.
Sublingual, yeah, okay. Which would have a lot of like poetic resonance as well, right?
You have to just kind of hold it in there. So you don't want it to, yeah.
But what about the apostrophe S? What is that? Is that a genitive? Is it a contraction? Sleep is dream? Or can we neglect the apostrophe and it becomes the plural, sleeps, dream?
Good question.
In terms of one sleep, and you have more sleeps in a way, and they all dream.
Yeah, please.
Perhaps an unfinished thought, an unfinished sentence. She didn't actually give the word that comes after it. On my nerves.
What was that? Can you repeat?
I just said maybe it's an unfinished sentence, in that she doesn't seem to want to finish it somehow, because it's a grammatical question. It's usually possessive has something that's possessed.
Yeah.
So, and I recently read something maybe a month ago where someone deliberately loved to sort of make things that didn't finish. And I thought that was very interesting. I still can't understand it. So
yes.
I
read it as a possessive.
All lines are fragmented. You do not have many work forms.
Well, what's the opposite of a dream that, like, sleep's dream? I think you can let sleep get away with a lot of stuff, but to me, when you have a dream, it's like you have to be responsible for it. Like, I have a dream to become something. You have to be responsible, but maybe sleep's responsible for this kind of dream.
There is sort of an controllability about what you're going to dream, but you don't really own the dream as you fall into it. Sleep does rather own the dream. Sleep's in charge. Sometimes I can be in the dream and be active, like tell someone to go away, and they do, and I sort of know it, or I sort of know I'm dreaming. But most of the time it's just happening, and I'm not in charge.
Yeah, so you're really so juxtapose it to my dream as something I want for the future, and the sleep's dream that's really away from you and just happens. Yeah.
Right.
Barbara, can you say more about knowing that you're not in charge when you're really the director of your movie?
Every once in a while I've been in a dream and it's gone away. I don't like it, and I can change it.
Yeah.
But that's very rare. Usually when I wake up, I remember something that I experienced that I wasn't in charge of.
Can one of the things that I think that DNA was thought of in a dream, the connection of the spirals.
Yes,
Really?
yes, it was. Yes.
And so dream, what kind of function? Nobody really understands the function of dreams, because it seems they put things together for you in a kind of new way. Interesting. And I heard a neuroscience talk one day saying when he has a very interesting dream, he goes back to sleep and see if he can continue it, and sometimes he can.
Yes.
That's also interesting as a control. It's kind of off the subject, but interesting about what Barbara said. Very interesting.
I do think that's a very interesting idea, that you don't take ownership over your dreams, like the ones that you're sleeping. I think that's very interesting. Like, it happens to you, something is doing that to you because it's your
Uncontrolled.
yeah.
Yeah.
Even if you're not in control, it's still from you, of you. I don't know.
That's
Well, Ramdas wrote about 30 books on that. Control.
More I was just going to say, more the unconscious is taking over rather than that conscious state.
Oh no, it's not like any like criticism of what you said or anything. I don't want.
Oh no, I understand that.
I just thought it was so interesting.
Well, that made me think. What you said made me think of that conscious unconscious. I hadn't quite put that in my mind, but yeah, I think that's helpful. Thank you.
I think, yeah, that's a good way to understand the possessively here for sure. Like, as thinking, yeah, challenging this idea of whose dream, it's like where I was like, oh, I had a dream, it was my dream. It's like, yeah, but is it really? It's always, is it there's this different kind of, there's this kind of like, I don't want to say invasion, but this sort of like steering of the brain and the mind and the imagination that happens, and it's sleep that's doing it, right? And that seems also to link a lot to the other themes of control, right, that we're talking about here, especially in relation to this poem, like the nerve flash, the sudden, your body like doing a thing that you can't control. And then also I think this idea of inheritance, right, of genetic inheritance. It's another thing, like your body is sort of it's not entirely in your control in that respect, right? Like there are characteristics of your body that have to do with like your mother, right? And that's not something you can change. most of the time. So
But
yeah.
you can through, like Rebecca just showed us, that she controlled her diabetes
Yeah, that's true.
and she doesn't have it anymore through diet.
Right,
And
right,
so
right, right.
you can consciously focus on something other than the nerve flash, you know.
Right.
It's just I want to go back to Mark's thought about sleep's dream or sleep's dream or sleep's dream. All those different various forms of the title. Why did she choose that, and why did she put that damn little apostrophe in there?
I'd like to also say it sort of sounds a little like stream, sleep stream.
Sleep Street, yeah. Ooh, and that kind of that also works with some of these other kinds of like moments of punning, right? That we've started to identify.
Didn't you say you're a punster, Kurt?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I've
I
noticed.
relish the people who sort of laugh and then who suppress their laugh and then walk away and then giggle.
Because we all forget to use our giggle wands. We've got them. We've all got one, you know. Just
I like the idea of sleep stream because
yes.
it is like a stream of thought, and she lived by water. That's interesting. Kurt, I like that a lot.
I can credit Mark with that because maybe his German accent brought that out for me, the way he said it.
Oh,
That line, the sense of what's seen, is interesting too. It's not what's visually a sense of it, like an intuition of it, not necessarily seeing it. And maybe getting a sense of her mother that was shocking, that she never had before, or that she wouldn't let herself think before, that came to her in that flash, that kind of frightening flash. And then at the end, she suddenly thought tall, tormented, dark, infested, and maybe that's something she couldn't really admit when she was awake.
Well, when she took cold on the nerves, did she mean she put ice on her feet or ice on her hands and it helped? What does she mean by I took cold on my nerves?
That's a really good question, and to me, it sounds like a sort of way of talking about being sick, right? Getting a chill, yeah, I took a cold on my nerves. You know, I had a
And then she has an Emily Dickinson dash, my mother.
Yeah.
You know.
It looks like it's that dash looks like it's attributing the dialogue. I took a cold on my nerves. A quote said by my mother, right? Like sometimes when you see like a quote, like a sort of you find like a citation or something, and it'll be attributed with a dash. The name. I want to quickly just tag back to what Mark, what you said earlier about the lack of verbs in this, which I think was a really good observation. The only
sorry, maybe I could ask something else first.
Yeah.
This I took on my nerves. It's split into lines. It starts with quotation marks and it also ends with quotation marks. So it indicates that it is one speech part, one sense. Does it really belong together? Is that one unit, or are these two fragments? I took cold on my nerves, or is it I took cold on my nerves? And in each phrase, something is missing.
Related to Barbara, Barbara, what you said did resonate with me. Like on a feeling level, I feel cold is like you numb yourself or disassociate, or you go to be safe, you maybe disassociate or numb. And I think of a flash, like when you wake up from a nightmare, you have to discern, is there really a threat here, or did I imagine it, or is this a signal? Is this a message? Can I forget it? Do I want to forget it? Or is my life and safety reliant on me getting this message?
Isn't the phrase something is getting on my nerves?
Yes.
On my nerves. And there's nothing getting on my nerves, but I took a cold. I caught a cold. And that gets on my nerves.
Right. Or you get on my nerves.
Is it I cool my nerves?
So you won't get to me.
No, anything.
But usually that single quotation mark that looks like an apostrophe, it sounds like somebody else's words, something maybe somebody else said, because if this kind of quotation in English usually comes with a double quotation mark, the kind people always do this.
Yeah.
When it's a quote within a quote. So it could be a quote that her mother said.
Oh, Allison, do you want to chime in?
Still with you. Yes, I was actually wondering if the cold on the nerves could be referring to like an actual virus. It's a little close to home at the moment, but you know, something like I'm thinking when you were talking about the neurological different effects, like something like, for example, like a viral meningitis that affects the nervous system, or I don't know if it's confirmed, but I know there's a lot of talk right now about MS being multiple sclerosis, a neurological chronic condition being caused initially by a viral infection. I wonder if it could be one of those sort of more antiquated things that, you know, doctors and patients used to say, that might describe an actual medical condition that maybe we don't necessarily relate to because it's obsolete, but this may be something that, you know, was said at times. A cold on the nerves might have been an actual condition. It might have been referring to the mother's condition, right? I also want to say, with regard to the neuropathy, which I also experience, it's an interesting concept that, you know, a damaged nerve or damaged nerve pathways can still feel, you know, much as a damaged relationship can still have love or have meaning. So I don't know if I read the dark infested mother as necessarily of the, you know, a villainous, shall we say, like, because it has been the analysis thus far that could be sort of a negative type, but it's possible that like when we're talking about subliminal, there's that surface memory that we have, you know, when say, for example, departed loved ones, after a long time or some time, we do have these sort of almost caricatures in our head of individuals and relationships that we've had. And then there is the underlying, like the meat that of the detail, I guess, of the relationship that may come to us at times in a flash, like in a lucid dream, you know, that we can't quite grasp consciously, because those memories, you know, particularly young people that have lost loved ones, the detail, right? The detail fades quickly, but it is still there, you know, at times, and will come back through something like a dream.
Thanks. Yeah, no, awesome. That makes a lot of sense. I really like this point about the damaged nerves pathways still being able to feel, or just like this persistence of feeling and sense and sensation in situations where, you know, it's presumed to be absent or no longer possible. Yeah, and then reading into, you know, reading that back into this sort of, you know, the connection, the connective nerve between mother and daughter here, right? As presumably daughter, it's true. Mark did warn us against the various fallacies here. Perhaps we were not exactly sure who the speaker is, but between mother and child here, you know, right? There's still something there, even if it seems soured here in this moment.
Well, looking at tormented and dark infested, I mean, you know, of course, maybe the human reaction is like, I don't want roaches in my house, or I don't want a roach in my, like, I don't want this vermin, you know, whatever. I don't want something I don't want an infestation. But if it's your mother who you're dependent on, and who's supposed to be your protection, to have your mother go cold, and that's a need you have. You might wonder, how did the mother become cold and tormented? So something's happened, I think, to the mother. And an infestation is something that acts upon something, you know, a place, a person. So that the verb infested, something, I saw it as something happened to the mother. I was wondering what you guys thought about that.
You're reminding me, Rebecca, I had forgotten that that the mother did lose her hearing, but the husband also deserted her. So something did happen to the mother. And also I looked up that phrase about chilling the nerves. I Googled it, I cheated. And it's a phrase that means to calm your nerves, to cool, to actually calm down. So it starts with this, you know, irritating the nerves. And then at that point, if that could mean a lot of things, but that's one thing it could mean. Is that it's a calming of the nerves. And it's a phrase, so it could be in quotes. I mean, it's a phrase people used. I had never heard it.
Are these connections correct?
Yeah.
I mean, as Jerome correctly said, does tormented refer to my mother? Does it refer to the dream? The verbs are missing. It's totally unclear what refers to what other object concept in the poem.
The lack of verbs, you know, as you mentioned earlier, I think is really crucial here, because the only, you know, looking at it again, the only clear verb, you know, that's spelled out, like there's arguably two verbs, but the only one that you can say for sure is took. I took cold on my nerves, which is a strange, in the context of this expression, which, thank you, Barbara, for giving us some background on it. In the context of this expression, took, it's like, it's a verb for sure, but it's not, you know, I took cold on my nerves. It's not the kind of, it's not like I took part in something, or I took, you know, I took my sword out of my scabbard. It's like, to take cold on one's nerves is actually a very passive kind of thing, right? Like I took ill, right? I took ill, which is the other one. Like you know, I didn't choose for this to happen. It happened to me. But the way that it's sort of said here, you know, and then the only other verb in the whole thing is potentially the contraction of what is, right? The sense of what is seen, what's seen. You know, that would be the verb to be, but it's not really, I don't know. Took is really, I mean, we have some debate about, you know, the apostrophes here anyway, right? So it's hard to say if it's really the sense of what is seen or the sense of the scene that belongs to what. So yeah, there's the verb, the lack of verbs, and also the fact that the only verb took is actually in cited or you know, quoted speech, right? Like it's somebody else saying this. It's almost like Niedecker is like, I don't do verbs here. And she doesn't, which is kind of, it's sort of fascinating. There's really like, you know, I think this is actually pretty common in a lot of Niedecker poems, but here it's really, it's seems pretty extreme. I don't know if there's any thoughts on any of that.
It makes it a really a permanent state of it was very brooding to me, especially because I thought of dark infested not in relation to the mother, but in relation to the sense of what's seen. It was something that's really like a constant in her dreams or in what she feels or senses.
And the next question is, who actually says that to code on my nerves? Is it the mother? Is it someone else? You have the dash, which can be a break, a pause, and then you have my mother tall, tormented. My mother is tall and tormented. So the beginning of a new idea.
Right.
Unlike told, which seems kind of, you know, like took like kind of something given or something kind of passive. I was thinking about trauma response, which is fight, freeze. Fight, freeze, fawn is a new one.
Flight.
What's the other?
Flight.
Yeah, fly or flee, right?
Fight,
Fight.
right. So funny, I forgot that. So anyway, freeze. So anyway, it was like, I know. I took cold. You know, when you're traumatized, you can go get your body goes into a freeze state. And anyway, that's interesting. I mean, I also have that experience of being in an accident and then getting into like this frozen state. And in fact, one of my friends came to me after I was released from the hospital from this accident, and she said, I think that your consciousness is still stuck at the accident, and I'm going to help you integrate your body to what happened. And I was like, okay, I guess. What? But definitely it was like the trauma made me like sort of divorced from myself, and I had to like get it reintegrated. So that's, I think, took cold reminds me of freeze trauma.
Back to the phrase that I looked up, it's really, the phrase is more like chilling my nerves. So she may have been playing with that in a new way, that chilling one's nerves is calming oneself down, but she says that in a different way. So she might have known that phrase, but played with it, because I don't think it quite fits in the way of calming down.
I mean, now we say chill out. You need to chill out, or I gotta chill out.
But taking cold on your nerves seems more chilling to me. Back to Halloween, it seems like a chilling kind of phrase.
Well, to me, it would be chilling if my mother was checked out.
I have a little other idea, is that I like this idea that you sort of examine the whole universe of your body, and like, where are your emotions? I don't know exactly where they are, when you wake up and you've had a very tough dream, you have this weird kind of sense of pressure in your head. And I like this nerve flash in the blood because I sort of feel like there's a difference between water. Blood is sort of a water-based thing, and nerve is sort of electricity-based. And so when you talk about cold on electricity, you don't throw water on an electrical fire.
Ooh.
So I sort of have this feeling that going with cold on your nerves, that's might be ineffective. I mean, sure, I don't know. So there's just something there that's troubling me a little bit. But I think it's kind of interesting to expand on that. The other thing I just wanted to say is that we started out with Barbara talking about an aging mother, and now we're all talking about her as a mother to a child because she's tall. And isn't that sort of, shouldn't we put that full circle in some sense? Because
I was
it
thinking
could
of
very
that.
well be she's an aging mother. Maybe she has Alzheimer's or something. And that as a mother, you're still the child in some sense, but you're also, she's an aging mother. So the whole story is compressed.
I was also thinking about the full circle thing you said. I think it's interesting. But I was thinking more in effect of becoming your parents, because we talked about the hereditary thing before. So I was thinking like you subconsciously maybe become your mother, and then if she heard like the phrase when she was younger and it doesn't make sense, or as a child you sometimes don't even like hear something right, like if it was like chilling the nerves, but you remember it wrong because you're older now, and then maybe something happens and you think, oh no, I'm becoming my mother and I understand this phrase now. Maybe she's like she thinks of herself like dull and tormented and dark infested.
I mean, I think Lori Niedecker's a good candidate for being dark infested. I'm not sure how tall she was, but I like that because you're sort of unpacking a bit of a like poetic theory here from this poem a little bit, right? Like that there's this relationship to language that changes, right? Like this sort of old-fashioned phrase that describes a feeling, but not always necessarily accurately, like serves as a medical diagnosis, and then it sort of kind of comes back to you and it makes sense, and then it unleashes sort of really tangentially related ideas, like like, oh, I was dreaming and then I had this nerve flash, and then oh yeah, my mom used to talk about her nerves, and oh yeah, my mom was really troubled, right? Like this sort of interesting sequence development of a thought, of an idea through this suddenly changed relationship to language, right? This thing, this phrase that would have entered subliminally, right? As we're saying, right? Like as you just said, right? Like this kind of, this thing that kind of, you hear it once and it sticks in your brain and it kind of works on you, and then it comes back one day, right? It's suddenly changed, suddenly making sense. Because it's probably not something that a young Lori Niedecker or a child hearing their parents say something like that, you'd be like, oh, I don't know what you mean. And it's not until until it happens to you, right? Mark?
Makes that then it is an allegory, right? The idea that I had, usually in literature you have a lot of these allegories, dream allegories, and now you're comparing this change in language, change in relationships. So it is an allegory, right?
Interesting. Yeah, insofar as the allegorical is about kind of A reflecting B, right? Like it's about one term kind of standing in.
That's a simple image.
Yeah.
That could turn to one of our next questions. Is it an imagist poem?
It's a good that's a very thoughtful question, and a good question to end our discussion on if anybody wants to you know, make the case for this being an Images poem or not, and then we can move over to the George Oppen poem, since we're at the halfway mark now. But yeah, I mean, yeah, it's true. Niedecker gets grouped in with the Imagists sometimes in our syllabus, no, not necessarily. No, she's a Dickinsonian. Well, anyway, does anybody have any thoughts on whether this poem, you know, exhibits some sort of poetic school, perhaps Imagism?
I was thinking that she's talking about the sense of what's seen, not really literally what's seen. And as I think about the word tall, I think, you know, I know a lot of, you know, very short women in my life who seem tall. Tall is, you know, people with big personalities in your life seem a lot taller than they are. So that word tall could carry some, since she's having a sense of, that word tall could mean just big, a big personality in her life. So those are my final thoughts.
Well, thanks, Barbara. That's anyone else wanna chime in? I mean, there's another well, yeah, I don't know. Does anybody else have any thoughts before I say what I was about to say?
I think that the last line, the last word that we've talked about, the dark infested, for me takes us right back to the beginning, to the first stanza, to this kind of like a nightmare happening with a nerve in the blood. It just sends you round again.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, the we're coming to realize your own, like, how darkness has infested you too, right? Like, Allison, go ahead.
Yeah, just riffing off that. I mean, when we say dark infested, I mean, what sprang to me there was actually like, or sorry, when you say back to the beginning, what sprang to my mind was actually, you know, the true beginning, like, you know, the Big Bang, you know, black holes. I mean, dark infested, where you know, the presence of an absence of, you know, matter itself, but it could be the presence of an absence of anything, you know, either literal or you know, metaphorical. So you know, that was an interesting choice of words that was, you know, sometimes I find, especially when I'm in listening in mode, the analysis can often be as poetically stated as the actual poem, and it's such a treat and a privilege, of course, to participate in this and to kind of coast while the rest of you are doing the heavy lifting. Thank you.
No, thank you, Allison, for that insight and for you know, for joining us today.
Well, actually, I think that the poem is the opposite. It's not an Imagist poem, but because you expect the exact word, not the nearly exact word. Caroline identified this dark infested, the dream as a nightmare. Why does she talk about the dream and not the nightmare? And also these fragments, as it is totally unclear what it really means. It is a concentration, but not everything is clear. It's quite blurred.
I would say that this poem seems very precise and the words are carefully chosen. Even if it's open to interpretation, doesn't mean that they were not carefully chosen.
But why dream, not nightmare?
I think it's because it's sort of like a noun and a verb. Nightmare isn't a verb, but sleep is the universal, and something invades it. If it's a nightmare, sleep can be good, bad, but then, aha, it's a bad one. But if you say it's a nightmare, it can't be a good one. So
That's true. I also think that nightmare would introduce from the get-go a kind of a tone or a sort of drama that in general Niedecker doesn't seem interested in, although to qualify that she does coin the fun neologism dark infested, which is very goth and kind of nightmarish, right? But nevertheless, yeah, I mean, I take your point, Mark, but I also think that there's like a, you know, to say, you know, Sleep's Nightmare from the get-go would turn it into a kind of like gothy poem, right? And when in reality, I think she wants to be more clear headed here. She wants to sort of bring an analysis forth that winds up being evaluative at the end. My mother was tormented and you know, not only that, but she was dark infested.
Is it clear? Who is tormented?
Right, okay, yeah, well, that's true. We don't actually know, but there's this idea of torment, of being tormented, and but that takes on this affect of being dark, infested, of that it takes on this color, it takes on this mood, it takes on this, you know, this connotation.
Yeah, I agree with you actually. I think the poem works its way towards the word dark infested.
Yeah, it does. Right.
When I said it sends you back, and then you think, oh yeah, so maybe the sleep dream was, you know, becoming a nightmare. And yes, I agree. You don't want the word nightmare in the first stanza because it will change the tone of the poem.
I think that's true. I think you, as you say, you said it well, Caroline, it works its way toward that there's this sort of like, you know, we start with this situation and it kind of, from there, she sort of extracts the feeling, the emotion. Did we just lose Barbara? Oh yeah. Maybe she'll come back. Another way maybe to describe this poem would be, although, you know, it's just as hard as trying to determine whether or not it's an images poem, is to determine whether or not it's an objectivist poem. And objectivism is, of course, something that we only talk about very tangentially in Modpo, but we're about to read a very famous work from an objectivist poet, and that is excerpt selections of George Oppen's Of Being Numerous, which I've sent around in the chat. And Niedecker is sometimes associated with the objectivist school, which but you know, she's not really like an official member. She's sort of like a maybe later addition to that. But George Oppen was one of the kind of like founding figures of objectivism, which is, you know, it's very similar to imagism, I would say, in many ways. You know, if imagism is like Ezra Pound's high modernist movement, objectivism is kind of like, you know, it's a sort of American, you know, I mean, Ezra Pound is American, obviously, but he spent so much time in Europe that he's often like lumped in with the European modernists. Objectivism is kind of like an American cousin to that, like a little bit, you know, like half a generation later. So let's read, I'm going to go ahead and read like the first couple of sections of Being Numerous, which was published in the late 60s, I want to say 1968 or 1969, and received the Pulitzer Prize. And it was like George Oppen's return to form, or return to poetry after having like bounced. I think he lived in Mexico or something. Like he was a poet for a bit, and then he was I think he fled the House Un-American Activities Committee. Like, I think McCarthy was coming after him, and so he sort of ducked out for a bit. Then he came back in the 60s and you know, published this very well received work. And you know, with this name of Being Numerous, maybe that starts to key us in a little bit too to how these poems fit together. You know, we do talk about Niedecker as being a sort of Dickinsonian poet, for many reasons, and I think we talked a little bit about the Dickinsonian dash that we saw in this poem, and there's something about the compression of language, that's very Dickinsonian, especially what we saw here in Subliminal, and then of course here we're going to see a poem that's about trying to capture something like the fact of being numerous, like of the manyness. And that feels like a very Whitmanian kind of impulse, right? So we're gonna be able to like maybe play these two poems off of each other to kind of get a sense of what's going on. They're also, I'm not sure when that Niedecker poem is written. I think they're roughly probably written in the same time period, because Niedecker was quite active as well in the 60s, as far as I recall. So I'm not exactly sure when that one came out, but there's a sort of mid-century American thing going on here with these two poems, although stylistically very different, and with very different subject matter. So this is George Oppen's Of Being Numerous, section 1. There are things we live among, and to see them is to know ourselves. Occurrence, a part of an infinite series, the sad marvels. Of this was told the tale of our wickedness. It is not our wickedness. You remember that old town we went to and we sat in the ruined window and we tried to imagine that we belonged to those times? It is dead and it is not dead, and you cannot imagine either its life or its death. The earth speaks and the salamander speaks. The spring comes and only obscures it. 2. So spoke of the existence of things, an unmanageable pantheon, absolute, but they say arid. A city of the corporations, glassed in dreams and images, and the pure joy of the mineral fact, though it is impenetrable as the world, if it is matter, is impenetrable. Number 3, the emotions are engaged, entering the city as entering any city. We are not coeval with the locality, but we imagine others are. We encounter them. Actually, a populace flows through the city. This is a language, therefore, of New York. 4. For the people of that flow are new, the old new to age as the young to youth, and to their dwelling for which the tarred roofs and the stoops and doors, a world of stoops, our petty alibi and satirical wit will not serve. 5. The great stone above the river and the pylon of the bridge, 1875, frozen in the moonlight in the frozen air over the footpath, consciousness which has nothing to gain, which awaits nothing, which loves itself. 6. We are pressed on each other. We will be told at once of anything that happens, and the discovery of fact bursts in a paroxysm of emotion now as always. Crusoe, we say, was rescued, so we have chosen. 7. Obsessed, bewildered by the shipwreck of the singular, we have chosen the meaning of being numerous. I think that's a great place to start, to stop and then to start. And Barbara's back. Huzzah. So that's the first 7 sections of George Oppen's long poem of Being Numerous, which was well received and awarded the Pulitzer Prize for Poetry in the late 60s. Hi, Barbara. Sorry we lost you. We're going to talk about the first 7 sections of George Oppen's Of Being Numerous. I'm going to post it again in the chat here so you have it handy. Yeah, what do we make of this? I mean, I set it up as a Whitmanian poem, to contrast it with the Dickinsonian poem we just read. It's a poem about New York City too. That seems very obvious. But what does it mean to be a numerous, right? Or of being numerous? How does this wait? This last line here is the one that I just read was, we have chosen, obsessed, bewildered by the shipwreck of the singular, we have chosen the meaning of being numerous. That's crazy. Obsessed, bewildered by the shipwreck of the singular, we have chosen the meaning of being numerous. I have no idea what that means, but it seems like the skeleton key to unlocking the entire poem. We don't have to necessarily start with that. We can start anywhere else if there's any first reactions.
Oh, of being numerous, of being international, of being a New Yorker.
Yeah, yeah, and you right. The
Yeah.
sheer peopleness of New York, right?
Uh, well, the idea that I had was the beginning of Moby Dick, which also starts in New York, and to show the internationalism of New York and how different people are, and that's what came to my mind, and also this Whitmanian idea. Whitman also writes about his hometown Manhattan.
Yeah, yeah. Manhattan or is he called Manhattan or is it Manhattos or something like that? Yeah, it's
Here's all forms.
yeah,
Like it's Manhattan.
yeah, of course it's Manhattan, yeah.
The little part that jumped out to me was the start of 3. The emotions are engaged, entering the city as entering any city, and this what you read, Max, gave me an idea of flow and of people flowing through this city.
Yeah.
And that just brought Eliot's The Wasteland to me, which we did
Huh.
discuss in an earlier
Yeah.
European meetup. I know it's not on the ModPo syllabus, but we
Right.
went off and looked at it. This chimed with my recollections of those discussions.
That's yeah, that of course, yeah, there's an absolute like echo, I think you're right, with Eliot, which would have been a poem published almost 50 years before this one, but the foundational text of modernist poetry. But of course in the Wasteland, the various like streams and rivers, they're like these Styx like rivers of dead souls, right?
Yeah.
Whereas here it's like this is section 3. The emotions are engaged, entering the city as entering any city. We are not coeval with the locality, but we imagine others are. We encounter them. Actually, a populace flows through the city. This is a language, therefore, of New York. For the people of that flow are new, the old, right? There's a flow, and it's river-like. It's a current, but it doesn't have that same connotation of the river of the dead or something, right? Like it's more matter of fact, which is kind of interesting, to see that sort of update.
Yes, but it's with Whitmanian. Whitman
Sure.
moves around New York, and he has the flow of the masses that even go through him. He adopted that idea from Emerson with this transparent eyeball. It's no longer nature; it's the city, the masses of people that come and go.
Yeah.
And the Styx-like river, you have the East River, which he passed on the ferry.
Yeah.
When he went to work and back home.
And also the East River is indirectly mentioned here because he mentions the bridge with the stone 1875, which, if I'm not mistaken, that must be the Brooklyn Bridge, which crosses or spans the East River from Manhattan to Brooklyn, which of course comes to replace Whitman's Ferry. So there's totally these very there's Whitman in here, there's rivers, there's all this. It's the same site as so these works of Whitman, or the same area that Whitman kind of worked with, and when he was writing about 19th century New York City. This of course is a century later. This is mid 20th century New York City, where the corporations are, where everything is glass, right? It's very different from Whitman's New York, where nothing was glass, except for the windows.
Yes, but the language is quite Whitmanian.
Yeah.
All the contradictions of being numerous. He includes everything. He has the thing, the item he talks about, and he also has the opposite, and he also contradicts. He really includes everything. It's numerous.
Yeah. That containing multitudes, right. But it's the Whitman had the multitudes and Oppen has the numerousness. Similar.
Of our wickedness. It is not our wickedness, so it must be the wickedness of someone else. So it's quite numerous. Yeah.
I was thinking
Isn't that the original sin? That our wickedness is not our wickedness?
Okay. Fall of man, yes.
Yeah.
Lee, were you about to jump in?
Oh yeah. I was thinking like the numerousness and the Whitman containing multitudes. And in this poem it's more like, or poem sections of poems, it's more like you encounter or you recognize the multitudes maybe. It doesn't seem to be inside the individual, or maybe we don't know how to find it if we are in a group of people, something like that.
Can you say more on that last point? About the like wait, so do you mean that like there's a sense of recognition more so in this poem, or I didn't quite follow what you meant?
Yeah, about maybe recognizing yourself because of the context of where you are and the people around you, and being in a city. And there was another section, occurrence, a part of an infinite series.
Yeah,
like everything is happening again and again, and if I'm going through it, then my neighbor's going through it, and that neighbor is going through it, and it's like there is not much of an individual words or meaning. Meaning is in being here with everyone else. So that seems kind of empty to me.
No, there's this, I mean, there's a different, well, what you're saying is making me wonder about like how, he relates to these multitudes, this numerous flow of people. I mean, because like Whitman is, Whitman wants to like, I don't know, he wants to relate to them and everything, but there's some, I don't know, Oppen here seems more at a remove to me, but I'm not entirely sure.
Well, when you sorry.
More that you're, maybe if you are so distracted by everything around you, then you can't find.
There's exactly. There's something about like, because there's something also about like a different phase of modernity that's being thought about in this poem, right? I mean, he says the city of corporations in glass, right? That's very different from a previous, urban life. Jeroen, did you want to jump in?
I want to add to that when he says in the second part, the pure joy of mineral fact, and he really abandons humanity. And when you think about Whitman, when he would talk about the Brooklyn Bridge, of course he would talk about everybody who was walking across it and doing stuff.
Yeah.
And here we have the big stone that says 1875. That's the essence of the Brooklyn Bridge. It's pure mechanical or well, non-human.
No, that's right. The pure joy of the mineral fact. So this reduction to something non-human and solid, and something that's going to outlive everyone who uses it, more or less, right? Like that's an interesting sort of detail for him. It's very different than, it's making me think here of the blab of the pave, right? Which is our common Whitman, that's how we always talk about Whitmanian style. And there we're always, we take the pavement, the paving stone to be this kind of like, it's a stage, right, on which all these various like dramas of everyday life are playing out, and Whitman wants to capture the blab, right? Like, but you know, in the way here, you know, this mineral factor, there's this wish to kind of foreground the pavement, right? To be like, you know, we need to deal with not the street as something that's constituted by its human uses, but the street as like stone, you know, as concrete, as this thing that's just like, you know, impenetrable. The street itself, or in this case, perhaps, you know, the stones of the pillars that hold up the suspension bridge of the Brooklyn Bridge, right? Like it's not about the people, you know, crossing this thing. It's just about like the thing itself. Well, you know, what happens when we actually, you know, stick to that? What happens when the blab makes us think of the pave, right? Rather than the pave making us, you know, tune into the blab.
But you also have that in section 3. This is a language of New York.
Right. This is right. Yeah, that's what he says. This is the language of New York.
A populace flows through the city, and then it is explained which city it is. It's New York.
Yes, but the populace flows through the city. It is definitely not the city itself. So the concrete, the mineral, the impenetrable matter is the real city, not the people.
Right.
But what is ambiguous is what is a language of New York? What's this? Is it the populace, a populace that flows through the city? Is it the flowing?
I would say it's the flowing, but that's because you know, I can't help but separate this poem, or no, I can't help but read this poem within its historical context of the late 60s of, you know, New York City and the full conversion to a sort of service economy, the corporatization of Manhattan, and how important the flow becomes, you know, meaning the flow of resources, of capital, of information, right? Like everything everything becomes so oriented towards flow, starting in the mid-century.
And rivers.
And right, and then of course it ties back there. The river serves that sort of, you know, there's a kind of natural metaphor for the flows that sustain New York City.
I have a little idea. In maybe they say it in Spanish, but Italian and French, they say when there's a meeting and someone introduces themselves, he says in French they say, "Thank you very much for being so numerous." And it's a way of saying he's glad that a lot of people came. But in a weird way, it's like, are you thanking me? I just came, you know?
Yeah.
So there is this idea that there's some social animal that's bigger than us. So when you talk about the populous flows, maybe we have to keep in mind that they're a social it is society, but they're also made of individuals. And
Yeah.
And so he's saying we are numerous. Well, I'm not. But I tend to live in cities, so I become part of the crowd. So it's like individual versus society kind of thing. And also, if I get one other thing of the singular, I like that word because singular often means single, but it also means bizarre sometimes, strange. And I think it'd be interesting to know why. When did singular become strange, etymologically?
Yeah. I imagine I'm just, well, you know what? I have the Merriam-Webster dictionary open in front of me, so why don't we just go for it? I was just about to venture a completely uninformed guess, but let's singular as in meaning outlandish. Where's the etymology?
That could be a tough one to find. I'll look up at Oxford. Because there's only one of it, so
Mm,
familiar.
yeah, I can't find the etymology for that meaning. But I mean, it must predate this poem, right? So,
I think it means somebody special, like
yeah.
a singular violinist,
Mm,
or como the pianist Gould. They called him a singular interpreter of Bach's Goldberg variations, for example, somebody special who does it much differently from the others.
Yeah.
But also in this idea, this is a language of New York. New York has hundreds of languages. And
yes.
I got the impression that it's this mixture that's going on, forming like Woody Allen Jewish New York talk, or Franz Leibowitz. They have a special language, but there are all kinds of other people speaking Puerto Rican Spanish or Polish or whatever, and Asian people. Everybody's speaking something in New York that's not really any language, any specific one. I thought of that as a language of New York. This movement, this is the part that makes it one unique. A language. The
I
movement
also
that,
the mosaic.
mm,
I also understood that as a mosaic of languages.
mm, Really?
Later on, Oppen also talks about dialects. They're also forms of language.
Maybe later.
Above in section 3, I think those lines, we are not co-eval with a locality, but we imagine others are. I thought that was an interesting set of lines that
Yeah, I agree, Barbara. There's so much. We are not coeval with the locality, but we imagine others are. We all are guilty of this, right? Like, not that it's a capital crime, but right, like when you go someplace, you're like, when you go to New York, you're like, hey, look, there's a New Yorker, as a New Yorker, right? But you're like, but I belong to no place, right? Or no, you might have a sense of belonging, but it's not. You're not coeval. It's you're not completely contained, to that. Like you leave the place where you're from, you can go to other places, you return. But it's true, and it's also speaks, I think, to the way that people and humanity is represented here, or not represented some of the time, at least in the sections of this poem that we read, right? Like there isn't the people have become flows, they've become almost part of the infrastructure of the city, right? Like and so they become coeval with it insofar as they're like, you go to New York and it's like there's just so much teeming masses of people. People are so numerous and they're flowing, they're coming and going. It's not even something to stop and admire and try to absorb in the way that Whitman did. It's just like it's just part of the circulatory system of this place. And so it's something that he seems to be working through here. Like how can you in some ways that's the shipwreck of the singular, right? Like the in the last section, how can you pluck one subject out? How can you underscore one thing, or how can you hold one person or one set of people or one event or something, and try to showcase it in a poem or a story or whatever? How can you do that in the face of such numerousness, right? Like there's just too many people, there's too much stuff. Like that's the shipwreck of the singular. Like there's no more sense of the singular either as like a single entity or as something noteworthy or exceptional, because we can observe too much of everything all of the time, and thus who are we to say that there isn't constantly exceptional things happening to all of these singular people who make up the numerousness? And I think that's sort of the problem he's trying to work through, in a way, in this poem.
And in section 4 he does break down what he means by the flow, and it's kind of like it's everybody, it's the new and the old who are new to age, and the young who are new to youth, and then the later part of that section, I'm not sure what a stoop is. Is that a particular New York word?
Yeah, so the stoop is where your so your house or your building will have a short staircase leading up to it, and the stoop that's the stoop essentially. And
Right.
it's a very New York concept, because people hang out on their stoops. They sit on the steps to be on the street. Because it's
I
serves.
think it's the Dutch word. Joram, it's a Dutch word, isn't
Oh,
it?
it is it Lee in your room? Is it a Dutch word?
Like step, stoop.
It's OE, stoop.
Oh, of course. Well, then maybe that's why it has.
The
Maybe
Dutch
that's why
word
so
from
it's so
Old
important to New York.
Amsterdam. New
Yeah.
Yeah,
Amsterdam.
of course. Yeah, that's why. Yeah, maybe that was brought over to New York City, right? Yeah, of course.
I don't think it's about tourism. It's you have Crusoe as a representative of the shipwrecked. I think he is also referring to these immigration waves that came to New York.
Yeah.
That we had those singular fates that in a way are similar to all the others, and this is also we imagine others they have the same fate, although it is different.
It's almost like the people that you, it's almost as though you're a tourist in the city and you see the same, you see all of these people in the same way as you see all of the buildings and all of the tourist attractions. It sort of collapses the population into another object of tourism.
Right, just to behold the throngs of people, right, is this
In such a generality without seeing the distinctions. It just becomes a flow.
And that's that's the way people today sometimes from the West who travel to countries and big cities in the East will say like, oh, you have to to go to Tokyo just to see how crowded it is, right? Just to see like the mass of humanity, right? Because even now New York City seems tame in comparison to places like Tokyo or Mumbai. It's or Delhi, right? Like it seems like so in some ways it's a little dated, right? Like he's obviously there have been crowded cities in the past, but in the 60s, if you're George Oppen, the most crowded place you can possibly reach is probably New York City, realistically. And so that's just like this, that's where you confront the mass of humanity and it becomes this curiosity, I think, right? Like this thing to behold, like, whoa.
And it makes me think about, taking it out of the poem a little bit, but when you think of people, say, who've never left the country, the country as rural, they live in a rural area, they definitely don't see themselves co-eval with the people in New York.
Right.
I mean, they just see New Yorkers as one big stereotype, I guess I'll say, or one big identity, and they can't single it out, which causes a lot of problems. And vice versa, I would say, a New Yorker probably has an idea of someone living in the Midwest that is also kind of a stereotypical kind of global look. So, I think that can be extended into the present and a broader context.
Yeah, I think
Go
I
ahead,
used it in the poem as well, with the kind of like maybe elitist way of looking at people that want to be alone or want to be on an island on their own, want to be shipwrecked maybe, and then
Robinson
maybe
Crusoe, yeah.
and then there's this obsessed, bewildered, and that we say he was rescued. Like there's this idea that living in the city and going into the crowd and being part of everything is better than being on your own.
Right, but he puts rescued in scare quotes there about Robinson Crusoe.
Yeah,
Right?
he doesn't think so, but
Yeah,
maybe
yeah. Crusoe would say was
we all think
rescued,
so.
brought back to the urban mass of humanity,
Yeah,
to civilization, essentially.
yeah.
That's interesting. Oh,
No, good.
just because they say twice, so we have chosen.
Yeah.
We have chosen the meaning of being numerous. We have chosen to be rescued, in quotes.
Mhm.
But then later he says, "So we have chosen." So it's interesting that he repeats that phrase.
We have chosen numerousness, right? That's what he's saying. Like as a society, because he says even reaching back to the 17th century early 18th century with Robinson Crusoe, for hundreds of years we have thought of humanity has strived towards a kind of numerousness. Even 300 years ago, Robinson Crusoe had to be rescued from his isolation, right? So we as a civilization, as a humanity, we choose numerousness. We see that as the better condition, and so we rescue people from their we rescue people who have been shipwrecked, lost at sea, stranded on desert islands. We have to go out and save them because that, being alone, although Robinson Crusoe is not really alone, but he's away from his society, right? He had to be brought back. He had to be rescued. Humanity had to kind of cluster together into this numerous blob, right? And like that's just what has to happen. So we have chosen.
Which is quite the contrast with the earlier Enlightenment, when people said, well, when we are alone, we have this perfect condition, and then we are
right.
We essentially lose our perfect humanity by being in a society. It's a big difference.
Yeah. Go ahead, Barbara.
I was just going to say, who's the we? He's universalizing.
Yeah.
And
every
identify with we. Everyone chose to be numerous. That's sort of an interesting thought. It's definitely, you're sort of discussing it. It's a kind of a Western approach to analyzing what's going on.
That's 100%. Yeah, we could definitely like interrogate and deconstruct this we, right? Who is he lumping together? We, at times, we are pressed on each other. It sounds like the New Yorkers, right? Although on one hand he's observing, in section 4 is like for the people of that flow, or he's observing the flow, and then in 6 we are pressed on each other. He's in the flow. And then, Crusoe, we say, was rescued. We is, I imagine, people who have read Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe. And he says, so we have chosen, which then becomes, it's sort of larger comment on human civilization. But obviously, of course, all of his references are not only American, but they're American, or they're Anglophone, or they're just definitely Western, right? I think that's a good point.
Because I don't think anybody would deny when you have, if you're presented with the story of Robinson Crusoe, you would say he was rescued, and in fact, if you read it, you are held in suspense, hoping he gets rescued. So you can't deny that you haven't chosen, that you prefer to be rescued than to be on the island.
Right, totally.
So the we is everybody in our time, co-evil with us. At least there. Other times it seems like it's New Yorkers, but
no, I think that's true. Mark, were you gonna jump in?
Just indicating that it certainly has these 3 or how many meanings we often encounter in ModPo. So we, the group we're in, we, a generalization in sense of one, they, or whatever, or it's the New Yorkers.
And it does say Crusoe, we say, was rescued. It doesn't say Crusoe definitely was rescued. It leaves some room there. We say he's rescued, but who says he was rescued? And do we all?
Right.
Like the sense of seeing. It's like the sense of seeing. He sensed that he was rescued. A little bit. Is that what you're saying, Barbara? A little bit?
Well, just all of these universal statements. I mean, I haven't thought through this a lot, but there are a lot of universal statements that I guess my automatically kind of critical mind wants to say, wait a minute, who's the we? Am I part of the we? Is the we someone else? Who is the we?
I know
you can
your room.
Easily get drawn into that we and think that you're the we, but if I step back, I wonder who is the we?
But I think we're social animals, like a wolf pack or a human pack. We're not like the lion. I think we always like have a social life. Like people join chorus, they join stamp collecting. There's a tendency to become a we, because people like I'm a people too, like to be with other people just like us now. It's more fun when there's several ideas flowing here. And so I think that's what the question is: how much are we an individual, and how much are we social beings?
It's and I mean that goes back to a sort of like, older. We were talking briefly about the Enlightenment. That goes back to kind of an older philosophical debate, of course, right? That's part of the Enlightenment debate. It also informs a lot American transcendentalism too, with Emerson, famously talking about the sort of transcendence you can achieve sort of as a solitary individual in a crowd, this sort of like what it means to maintain your sense of self, in the kind of mass.
Don't forget Frank Sinatra. I did it my way.
Right. Right. Kind of going against everything. And I think there's also like, just to, since we're nearing the end of the hour here, there's another context for this historical context for this poem, which is of course the fears that were circulating in the 1960s of overpopulation. So there's there was this suddenly with the baby boom and everything after World War II, there was this suddenly this discourse in the 60s that like, oh no, we're humanity is growing exponentially, and that's going to be the biggest problem we face. And this is sort of this kind of concern eventually morphed into contemporary like analysis and sort of concern for climate, or contemporary analysis of climate change and a general sort of ecological awareness. But that kind of fear in the 60s like motivated a lot of different kinds of thinking about conservation and stuff like that. And I think there's a way in which he's sort of kind of writing about that in a way. There's this numerousness, this exponential growth of humanity that's kind of like wow, what are we gonna do? What's gonna happen? And that's a very different, I think it's very different from the sort of the crowds and the blab of the pave and all this stuff that we see in Whitman. This kind of like this like, oh wow, it's so cool being in a city because there's just so much humanity, it's so vibrant. And then you have this version of it where it's just like, oh yeah, being in a city is cool, but like it's also you see so many, you're confronted with the massive humanity, and it just seems to be growing, and it seems unstoppable. And it's what we've chosen, right? Like it's like it's I mean, of course, the overpopulation debate, that whole moment, that's it's controversial for for lots of reasons, and it didn't quite pan out to be the giant, so there's some really like alarmist stuff back in the 60s where we're like, oh my God, we're all going to starve to death, which didn't exactly happen. But there's there is that real confrontation with humanity as a kind of geological force, almost like the mineral fact, right, of this poem. Like there's the stones of the bridge, and there's just like the ceaseless flow of people in New York City, and both of those things seem as like just as impenetrable, equally impenetrable, right? They're co-evil, even if they're not really, because everybody has their own inner life, and it's rich and complex in its own way, and so it's always hard, to think about the humanity, to think about numerousness, to think about like just humanity as a mass when there's so much like inner depth and richness. I really think that's what this poem is trying to figure out for itself, right? Like, what on earth, how can we have humanism in the face of so much humanity? Like, right, it's not like that the more humanity there is, the more humanism there is necessarily. It actually seems like the opposite. The more humanity there is, the harder it is to kind of get a grasp of what it means to be human, and hence why these humans in this poem are operate sort of infrastructurally like part of a circulatory system, and there's this sudden interest in like stones and bridges. It's just kind of like, if we're going to talk about people, we might as well be talking about stones too. We might as well be talking about glass. We might as well be talking about all these other things that make up the city, because in some level they're coeval. On some level they can't be separated from each other, and it's a provocation. It's a challenging provocation, that really, like, I think goes a long way for helping us to think about like Whitmanianism, or it kind of presents another account of what it means to be this kind of open-hearted maximalist poet who wants to say something about humanity, because you have here this poem that's sort of challenged and troubled by that prospect.
But then
I
there's
think
the
Oh.
cash flow in New York. Cash flow had nothing to do. They don't care about humanity.
Yeah,
Just cash keeps flowing.
sure. Right. That's a good point. Yeah, there's these other sorts of flows, right, that are actually, are more brutal or unhuman, right? Or Barbara, were you about to chime in, or was it?
I was going to just say that I don't think that I'm overgeneralizing, but from my perspective, it seems that ethics aren't considered enough then or now, and that there is a way to be an individual and live in community that requires some sense of ethics. And going back to your thinking about the scare about population back in the 60s, I was in grad school, and the population has grown. It was 3.5 billion when I was born, and it's 9 billion now. So it was
More than doubled.
It was a valid prediction. But when I was in grad school, there was a lot of blaming the poor because the poor had too many children. And that was obviously a oversimplification. And I remember some pushback against that idea, but that was a common idea that if poor people would just quit having all those babies, we wouldn't have this problem. So there needs to be an ethic in how you build this kind of humanity. And I was just thinking about our current situation where AI is becoming a little like what industrialization was to people during the Industrial Revolution. Now we're having an AI revolution, and it's causing some of the same issues. So I just find that interesting to bring it into the present.
I think, yeah, that's well said, Barbara. And I think this issue of ethics is maybe also what is this poem is attempting to explore perhaps to some degree, right? Like, you know, I keep on thinking of the shipwreck of the singular, and you know, this obsessed, bewildered by the shipwreck of the singular. We have chosen the meaning of being numerous, right? As this kind of being like there's a gap, right? There's some sort of space between you know, the singular and the numerous, and it gets filled with something, and it's not clear what it gets filled with, and this poem seems to be thinking about. And perhaps, you know, there is this idea of a kind of like ethical, right, relationship to being a sort of individual in society, or a sort of singular entity in you know, in you know, among many. It kind of goes with that idea of the coefficient, the coeval, you know, individual in the city, right? Like there's actually, you know, no person is coeval with the place they're from. But there's a kind of gap between those things, right? And it gets filled in different ways. Between being an individual and being part of a community, right? It's not, you're not just perfectly slotted in there in the community and it makes sense. There's actually a kind of distance that gets negotiated and renegotiated, a sense of belonging, essentially.
I think it's interesting that he also says we have chosen the meaning of being numerous. He doesn't just say we've chosen to be numerous.
Yeah.
As an emphasis on the meaning.
We've chosen the meaning. Yeah, that's good. We have chosen the meaning of being numerous. And the meaning of being numerous seems in some ways the meaning of being human, right? Because the right, this goes back to what we were saying a moment ago about, I think Mary, you're saying this about you know, the humans being social animals. Yeah, you know, with the to be alone on an island, to be shipwrecked like Robinson Crusoe, is something you have to be rescued from. And thus, you know, being numerous, being among others is the preferable condition. And so that condition is going to be what we pursue at all odds, at all times. And it's going to eventually grow and grow and grow and grow until we're so numerous that you know, we're just, people are like a river flowing through a city. It's, yeah, it's interesting.
I was
We-
also
Oh, Barbara Lee.
thank you. I was thinking about what you both said about having children and like the meaning of being numerous and the meaning of like living or something. Like for some people it's having children and you know passing things to the next generation. But now that the next generation is turning out to be so big that we have to build cities and high rises to put them all in so they can live somewhere.
Yeah.
And now that meaning has become this city, like this city or like this big group of people living in something we built for them to live in, and that's
Cool. Yeah, no, that's the yeah, I like that. That New York City in some way becomes the meaning of being numerous. It becomes the definition, at least in the case of this poem. But Barbara, did you?
I was just thinking about Emily Dickinson living much more isolated life, not totally like we sometimes stereotype her, but certainly not living a New York City life. But she had her own numerousness inside of herself, so we can be alone and still be numerous. So it's a not just an external concept, but an internal one too.
That's, yeah, and right, and that's also a bit like the containing multitudes, the Whitmanian containment of multitudes, or the, you know, of being sort of a plural singular entity, insofar as you can contradict yourself, as Whitman famously says, you know, like, do I contradict myself? Well, then fine, I contradict myself because I am so many selves, right? Like I myself am numerous, right? I myself am already plural, right? Like it's which is, yeah, which I think adds then this extra like exponential element to this poem, right? Like it's a plurality of pluralities or something.
Now it's how many personal brands do you have?
Yeah. And that I think is also a little bit hinted at in this poem. I think it's a little bit sensed, right? I mean, because the late 60s too is also a time of increasing scrutiny on marketing, commercialization, of the commodification of everything. And you kind of have that a little bit here too with the city of corporations, as he calls New York City, right? Like this all these glass skyscrapers being built for ad agencies or banks.
Yeah, and 4, it's are new, the old, new to age, is the young to youth.
Yeah,
I love that. Yeah.
yeah.
Maybe one of the things that links the two poems is infest is a human. The second poem is human infested.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's great, Kurt. Yeah, this poem is infested by humanity. That's absolutely what it is. It's also infested by things, which we didn't talk too much about either. But it's infested by, not by a sort of emotion, like in the Niedecker poem, Dark Infested, but it's infested by things, by quantities rather than qualities.
Does anybody think of, well, by the shipwreck to the singular, maybe they're talking about the end of, I mean, like Nietzsche's phrase, God is dead, because it's singular also like monotheism.
Or you go ahead, Barbara.
I was just going to say, or any truth with a capital T.
Yeah.
Any use of universal stand. Yeah, that really fell apart in the 60s with all the diverse voices that started speaking up.
Oh,
That's
absolutely.
a good point.
People stopped going to church around that time.
Yeah. And it's
God is Time magazine on the cover.
What was it on the cover? I'm sorry.
God is dead.
Oh, really? They had that on the cover. Wow.
And the Beatles becoming more important than God.
Right. Actually, it was the New York Times, January 9th, 1966, God is dead. Which is also
interesting. The part 8 starts with a Nietzschean phrase too, amor fati. That's all.
Oh, amor fati, the love of fate.
Nietzsche talks all the time about that.
Well, there's so much more we could do with this poem. Thanks so much, y'all, for going on this journey together. Thanks for the very informative and enlightening discussion of Laura Niedecker's Subliminal, which I think was very useful because it's an essay assignment poem and it's quite difficult. So I think it was nice to actually like have a chance to talk about this rather than to just like think about it on one's own, but to like get together and have a conversation about it. And thanks too for this discussion of George Oppen's Of Being Numerous, which is something I just kind of came across very recently while reading something about something completely different. And I thought it would be a fun thing to lump in here with Niedecker because of this loose objectivist poet connection, even though they're quite, they're obviously quite different, but I think you put it well, Kurt. They're both infested as poems. They're both infested in their own ways. I believe the next meeting, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.